A used car dealership in Springfield played a key role in one of Florida's most infamous murders. Or did it? Well, it's hard to say. When it comes to the story of Jacksonville's fake serial killer, Otis Toole, nobody really knows. But I am joined now by Tim Gilmore, creator of the JaxPsychoGeo blog and longtime chronicler of Otis Toole, this alleged possible serial killer. Tell us about this particular story. This is a building that was involved. It was a former car dealership. It's currently an ice cream store. It's a Dreamette.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it was a place that Otis Toole worked, and it has a connection to a really high-profile case.
Right. Yeah. This is this is the newest location for the Dreamette, which is also, a historic Jacksonville icon. I think you could say the original Dreamette in Murray Hill. This was Spence Auto Sales, which was run by a guy named Spencer Bennett for about 20 years. It's on Main Street, Main and 4th Street in Springfield. And Otis Toole was either one of the most successful serial killers in American history, or he was a liar who was really convenient for closing a lot of murder cases. I think if you look very closely at it at all, it becomes pretty obvious that the latter is the truth and not the former.
He had a habit of confessing or having confessions drawn out of him, but this case was the case of a kidnapped and murdered child in Florida, Adam Walsh. It was a really big case at the time, and it became a big movie.
Right. If you look at the way investigators interrogated Otis Toole over and over again in the early 1980s, it's almost a textbook version of what not to do if you want to actually arrive at the truth. And they would feed Otis Toole information. Otis Toole had supposedly an IQ of about 75. He was almost completely illiterate. He had been physically, sexually abused all his life. And he hooked up in all ways with Henry Lee Lucas, better known actual serial killer in Jacksonville. They met on Valentine's Day down here in Jacksonville, 1976. When investigators would bring Otis Toole cases saying, hey, you did this, didn't you? They treated him with a kind of respect that he'd never had before. And so at one point, people started saying that Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole together had killed. The number was all over the place, but at one point, as many as 600 people across the country.
Wow.
I don't think Otis Toole ever intentionally killed anybody. He liked to set fires. He set numbers of these gorgeous old Springfield houses on fire, including one on East 2nd Street, where that was a rooming house that he stayed in for a good bit. People would hire him to clean up and sweep the floor and pay him a few dollars. And it looks like Spencer Bennett did this as well at his used car shop. And even though Otis Toole couldn't read and never had a driver's license, he did over the years buy a couple of super cheap clunkers from Bennett. So the narrative became that one of these was the so-called death car in which he kidnapped and murdered Adam Walsh, who was the son of John Walsh, who later ended up hosting America's Most Wanted.
Yeah.
And
And so police came to this dealership trying to make that connection with Spencer Auto and this so-called death car and connect it all to Otis Toole. And they did charge him with this case?
It's so strange. If you look at this from two different points in time, at one point, if you look at the actual interrogations, the way they fed him information, and even still, a lot of times he couldn't really understand what they wanted, and he would get things wrong, and they'd get really frustrated with him. At one point, they're asking him if he killed Adam Walsh. Turns out later that he had seen the TV movie about Adam Walsh's kidnapping and murder in jail the night before they interrogated him once. He got so many things confused. He said Adam Walsh's name was Jim. He said he was wearing dungarees and mittens. This is in July. He said he was going south toward Miami, or maybe it was north toward Miami. He said Henry was with him. He said Henry wasn't with him. When they showed him a picture of Adam's head, decapitated head, he became really upset. Then he said he killed him with a machete. Then he said with a bayonet. And then he said that he just made the whole thing up to get back at Henry Lee Lucas, because Lucas had actually left town in a car from Spence Auto Sales with Otis Toole's 13-year-old niece, whom Lucas later killed in Texas. So if you look at it from that point in the early 1980s, you look at it honestly and clearly, it's pretty clear what the situation was. But 2008, this is 12 years after Otis Toole died in prison, the Hollywood Police Department officially announced after his death that he was the murderer of Adam Walsh. I didn't even know you could do this. There's no new evidence. In fact, they had lost the car. I don't know how a police department loses a car, but they did. There was never any trial. Something they said was called exceptional clearance. So in 2008, headlines all over the place said that the mystery was finally solved. Nothing was solved. The police department used what they called exceptional clearance to, go around any new evidence or a trial and say that it was Otis Toole, case closed.
Extraordinary. How many murders is he credited with?
It depends on where you're looking. So there was an old man who was staying in the rooming house on East 2nd Street when Otis Toole set it on fire, who died. And so that one is not a murder per se, but it's certainly a death at Otis Toole's hands. But, it ranges from somewhere around a dozen to half dozen, although there are still tons of sources, and there are these, sites that people absolutely love, like Murderpedia, that sometimes say that he killed hundreds of people and that he was this murderous mastermind.
Wow. Well, another weird, strange Jacksonville story brought to us by Tim Gilmore. He's the author of the JaxPsychoGeo blog, and he joins us periodically to share some of this unusual and really compelling history. Tim, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to do it. Thank you for having me.